Hey, viewer, welcome again to Zoom In. Today we are focusing on young people. Hi, young people. And as they say in Niaje, we want to talk about the topic, flee for your life. We have a good example of Joseph in Potiphar's house. And today we have Joseph's that we are going to talk about. Flee from your life, the lusts of sex and masturbation. During this quarantine, I've heard people say out there, kuja tuquarantine pamoja. So we want to talk about that. And to help us talk about this, we have brother Kasmuel Oure. Kasmuel, karibu sana. We have Beryl Apondi. Apondi, karibu.
Hello.
Okay, and then we have Audrey Charlotte. Welcome to the show.
Hey, everyone.
And we have my friend Jackson Saya. Karibu sana. Now, Saya.
Yo.
Addiction.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have positive addiction and negative addiction? What is addiction?
So from the get-go, no, there's no positive or negative addiction.
Mm-hmm.
The way God designed the human being is with the ability called free will.
Mm-hmm.
And anything, whether a positive or a negative, that, and by positive or negative, I mean even if inherently in itself it's not something negative, the moment that thing begins controlling an individual, and the individual is not in charge, then that becomes a source for concern. And that's hence the English word called temperance. Temperance means the judicial use of that which is good and completely abstaining from that which is negative. So whenever anything crosses those two important limits, if it's a negative thing, is a no-no. If it's a good thing, it needs to be used judiciously. And when used judiciously, it means the user should be in control and not the other way around. Not the thing, not the object should be in control of the person. So addiction refers therefore to the situation where an individual develops a state of either dependency or over-reliance that seeds control. They end up seeding an amount of control to that thing, habit, person, place, habit, whichever one it is. So in that light, I don't think there's a positive or a negative addiction. It's almost like saying a sanctified gossip, something like that.
Now, Beryl, what do you think?
Yes.
What do you think about addiction?
I don't. Addiction I don't think there's any positive or negative addiction. Yeah, it's just addiction, and it's something that our bodies should not be going through, because we need to be temperate and control ourselves at all times. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Kasmuel?
Well, as Saya and Beryl have actually pointed out, that there's no negative or positive addiction. But now, if I think about it, the moment we introduce the word temperance means that addiction leans more towards negative than it does positive, because we are not using whatever good or bad judiciously. So I feel that addiction in and of its own, just the way we could say any other thing is not inherently evil, the moment that we decide to use it in a manner where we depend on it, because addiction also could be defined as the state of being, I think, overly dependent. And I feel once we take that away, and especially in the Christian context where we're supposed to be having all our dependency on God as much as is possible, because in and of our own, we cannot do anything. The moment we have something that we are addicted to means that we cannot do without this thing. So in some sort of way, it is some form of God in our lives. And to that end, I would term addictions as negative.
Mm-hmm.
I would think of addictions as being negative, regardless.
So in your case, we wouldn't say that you are addicted to whatever drink that is in your cup.
Well,
He's addicted to the cup, not the drink.
Not the drink.
the
Charlotte,
Yeah.
what is your, what do you think about addiction?
I don't think we can connote addiction of any type, first of all, in terms of being positive or negative. But as long as we become addicted to something, it becomes a god in our life. Yeah, just as Kasmuel was saying, it now becomes a form of idolatry, more or less. And also, even in, let's say, matters religious, when you like addicted to something, even when the thing was good, end up acting like a fanatic, which in the end becomes quite negative anyway. So the whatever practice you may start out, be it a positive practice or negative, the effect may not look like it's really negative, but in the long run, addiction may actually just be anything negative, even if it is addicted to the right kinds of, anything. When it's in the long run, when you become intemperate with it becomes idolatry, and even if it were a good thing, you just become a fanatic.
Okay.
Yeah.
So guys, I have two phrases here that I want us to build on. The first one, as they say, an idle mind is the devil's workshop, and then a biblical statement that says, "Out of the abundance of the heart." Let me give another one. As a man thinketh, so is he. Sire, we know that the addiction is a process, whether it's positive or negative. It's not something that you wake up today and find yourself addicted to it. So let us talk briefly about that process. Then we come back again, and then now we bring in Kasmuel, Beryl, and Audrey, just to tell us their experiences with this addiction, if at all they have experienced it, or they have friends or relatives or anyone who has been addicted to this.
So I remember I used to be a member of drama band. I still am an honorary member. And there's a very easy mantra that helps us understand the process. It used to say, sow a thought and reap an act. Sow an act and reap a habit. Sow a habit and reap a character. Sow a character and reap a destiny. I think that's a perfect way we used to think about it. Begins with a thought. The thought acted on becomes an act. Repeat the act, it forms a habit. Repeat the habit, it forms a character. And then your character determines your destiny. But two apt ways to see it is James 1:13 through to 16 is a very beautiful passage. It says, "Let no man say when he's tempted that I'm tempted of God. For God is not tempted by evil, neither tempteth he any man. But every man is tempted when he's led away of his own lusts, and then deceived. And when lust has conceived, it brings forth sin. And when sin is finished, it leads to death." So at least the James analogy begins from lust. Then he says lust is the female. It comes together with a father, a male, called deception. So lust plus deception brings forth sin, and then sin leads to death. So the key thing is to understand what lust is. Lust is nothing more but a God-given desire being fulfilled outside of God-given environments. So each one of us, since we are being made...
Say that again. What is lust?
Lust is a God-given desire being fulfilled outside of God-given environments.
Okay.
So each one of us is made in God's image, and so we have desires, which are natural. Desires, by the way, Dave, God gives us desires for two reasons. Reason number one for giving us desires is they reflect his image in us. And reason number two for God giving us desires is they're a pipe or a conduit through which he fulfills us. So for instance, hunger exists so that when we get food, we get fulfilled. And so, like, since today we're talking about sex, sex is given by God. At times we operate like it came from Hollywood. No, sex was given by God. And then it was given an environment called marriage. And in marriage, the act of sex is the two coming to be one. It's an act of communion. And then number two, the sexual desire in marriage, God fulfills us through our spouses. So it's a beautiful thing within marriage. But when we take sex outside of God's given environments called marriage, it now takes on lust. Now, lust can be adultery, bestiality, fornication, masturbation, all the various other things other than holy matrimony. And so then James now kicks in. He says, now once you have that lust, once you have these sexual drives you want to fulfill outside of God-given environments, the devil kicks in with deception. So he tells you things like, if you don't have sex before marriage, you will never be able to have the experience. That's a lie. If you don't sleep with your girlfriend, she will leave you. That's a deception. If he really loves you, he will sleep with you. That's a lie. The various forms of deception that the devil comes in. But this desire being fulfilled outside of God-given environments, combined with whichever deception the devil gives us, becomes a very powerful thing within our lives. Let me hand it over to the next person by saying this. Therefore, why, especially in the domain of sexual lust, it becomes very strong is because this is my science background kicking in, if you reverse engineered it, the original DNA that the masturbator is struggling with or the fornicator is struggling with, if you reverse engineer it, the original DNA comes from God. That original desire is something God gave to them. Now, the only difference is they've taken it outside of his environments. That's why it's a very powerful urge to struggle with. But just biblically speaking, that's anchoring it. But over to you and to the rest.
Thank you. Kasmuel, Saya has brought in something very nice. Thought, act, habit, and then becomes character. What are some of these thoughts that that will lead us to an act of addiction? And this, we're talking about lust, sex, and masturbation.
Well, I actually really love what he says, how he explained lust, because I'd never thought about it like that before, where he says lust is a God-given desire enacted outside God's given or favorable environment. And some of these thoughts necessarily, we might not conceive them willingly, because I think from a very personal experience, I would think I didn't know the first time I had an experience of masturbation until I got to high school and knew that's what masturbation was. Because all through, I realized that, because I used to be like a super, but I was smart. I was smart in primary. I was. I wanted to downplay that, but I really was. And like there are these long papers like social studies, which would take
2 hours.
Which were really obvious questions. And I was like, why would they give us so much time? So you'd go try and do IRE, and then it gets boring. So that you're like, if I could pass IRE, sometimes I try to pass IRE more than CID and stuff like that. But I remember, I, as a young boy, I knew that once I was done with these papers, if I sat some certain type of way, I would feel really nice. I didn't know what that was, but I was like, hey, let me finish my paper really quickly so that I sit the way I normally sit. And I didn't know. To me, I was just like, super interesting thing to do after an exam. And I think now that's the other, because I started to look at it as Saya brought the aspect of reverse engineering. I wanted to see, do we as youth start conceiving these thoughts once we get into high school or once we get into campus where our parents tell us stuff like, don't even look at a boy, because if you look at a boy will just tie you on a tree, and then you see how the sex talk that our parents usually give us, which are super interesting. As someone, like I remember, I'm so sorry because my father watches okay.
Apologies accepted.
Most interesting talks I had with my dad when I was a bit young, when I was promising, and he was like, some of these girls, they'll come to you and tell you, me the way I look, me I can't be sick. You see the way I look healthy. And it hit me, I think a year later, that he was trying to tell me that AIDS is a thing in campus. And I find that to be very laughable. But now back to this. I also teach, I'm a music educator, and I happen to teach preschool kids all the way to high school, and people who are doing their A-levels. And in one of my classes, when I was teaching preschool kids, I realized that these kids have started experimenting with their genitalia as early as 3 years old or 4 years old. And I was like, I think what it is that I thought I knew before I started being keen and prompting such discussions amongst my friends is that we it just proves the truth of the Bible that man is inherently, like, the heart is deceitful above all things, and there's nothing wholly of our own apart from that which comes from God.
Okay.
So the thoughts, I cannot necessarily say that, if a child is exposed to this, or if a child looks like this, or sits like this, or drinks this kind of water from this type of cup, these are the kind of thoughts that come into the child. But I know for sure that especially the generation that we live in has done more harm than good when it comes to exposure to sexual material and most of the thoughts that we form. Because personally, to me, when I was a kid in primary school, I didn't necessarily have sexual imagery when I was having my sexcapades, I don't know what to call it. But now, with the exposure to high school and pornographic material, now that was linked. Now I could say I could have pictures to what it is that I had in me. And that kind of helps me understand what Saya was saying, that if we reverse engineer it, we find that the original comes from, sadly, we chose to corrupt it, but the original comes from God.
Thanks, Kasmuel. Beryl, exposure, and this is basically the first step, the thought. Exposure. What this process to get there? Take us through. Any experience, anything that you'd want to share?
Hi. Exposure. I mean, it happens to almost everyone. I think in this day and age, my younger brother, who's just 13 years old, I do think he's seen pornographic content because, like, with all the gangeton, I mean, it's a bit. It's going to be me lying saying that he's not seen it. But for me, how I got exposed was through novels. I used to really, really love to read novels so much when I was in primary and high school. But it got worse in high school because now in high school you're given the novels with everything inside them. Mm-hmm. And that's when I got it. And, it's funny because before you read it or before I was exposed, I didn't actually... I didn't know what it is I was going through or what it was that I was feeling. You feel it, but it's not that much because I started feeling it when I was in class 7. That was when I was 11 years old, the urge. Right? Mm-hmm. But when I read the novels now, it's like it exaggerates the urge. They come out, it's just giving it more power and more power. Mm-hmm. Yes, and so where I am right now, trying to overcome the addiction is I make sure that around me, in my phone, in my conversations, I try as much as possible to stay away from sexually explicit content. Yeah.
Okay. Charlotte.
Yes.
Your experience?
I don't know. I don't think it started out with viewing either extremely explicit content, mm-hmm. But first of all, we have to admit that sex comes from God and He gives hormones to all of us. So naturally, there are times you just want to feel good, like you're just feeling good. And being a child, you really don't know where this feeling good comes from until now you're triggered by, let's say, watching soap operas. When you were younger and it's 8 p.m. and everyone in the house is sitting down to watch these Mexican soap operas and you see them kissing one another, and then before you sleep, you kiss your pillow and feel, wow, this could be what, you see.
Prince Charming, then, as they say.
Exactly. And then when now you go... Yes.
So.
Yeah. And then... and then when you go to school now, you suddenly are attracting boys, mm-hmm. And when you're getting off the school bus and they hug you, and now you actually feel an actual effect on your real body, and so you want to try and explore more. Mm-hmm. But inherently, it started out from the hormones which God gave you. So the moment we entertain this thought of just living a step to outside of the will of God, and we want to explore what this body could be feeling outside of God's presence, then you find yourself indulging over and over and over again. And as Saya has said, the one trigger which was a thought, then you act upon it, and now you act upon it on Monday, on Tuesday, on Wednesday, it's now a habit, and before you know it, it's just your character. And 15 years from then, it's just a struggle. So I think the initial urge is there, but the fact that we have still not taught our kids, we've not been taught the surrounding by which we should, how can I phrase it? The environment by which this feeling good should be exercised is what actually leads it to even deciding our destinies, for that matter.
Sir, neuroscience tells us that in our brains, in our system, there's what we call a reward system. So when you do something and you felt an emotion and maybe something good, then there is what we call a neural pathway. It forms in your brain. So the more you do this thing, the more the pathway becomes thicker. And maybe after, as I say, habit develops after 21 days or so, 3 weeks. So it becomes thick to an extent that it becomes part of you. What do you think?
It's true. That's a domain I studied in school. So there are two things you need to know. One is dopamine. Dopamine is that hormone you're referring to. It's a dopamine release. Every masturbator, every movie addict, what they really don't know, they're dopamine addicts. So that act of masturbation or all the sexual triggers releases. One of the sex was designed naturally as an opiate releaser. Opiate is the same thing you get when you smoke weed, okay? But sex is a natural opiate releaser. So there's I think it's Charlotte to say there's a feel-good thing. Yes, it's at the chemical level, it's happening. And the neural pathways that form in us, so like if you're a liar, okay, let's stick with today. If you're a masturbator, there's a way, if I do a scan of your brain, the triggers that happen within your mind and the pathways have actually formed. It's almost like a grass field where people have walked until a path has formed. It almost forms that way. Now, the speed and the strength of that pathway is determined by frequency and the number of senses involved. You know, the way our brains get triggers is through our senses: sight, hearing, taste, touch. So why masturbation and other sexual variants end up informing that pathway very thick is, and it's very amazing listening to the pathways. Beryl talks about reading, so that's a lot about sight and then forming the mental pictures. Charlotte talks about touch, you know, the experience of hugging. So when it comes to most of the sexual struggles, why the neural pathways form a bit stronger and quicker is because in most cases, a minimum of 3 senses is being involved. In more advanced cases, all 5 are being involved, especially now when you've gotten to the level of watching pornography and masturbating, you have almost all 5 senses forming. And so the pathways are forming. I know I'm jumping the gun here ahead, but the beauty is this: anything that is learned can be unlearned, but it is important for us to understand how we learn. Sorry, Dave, for over-talking, but let me remind us, as a learning scientist, there are 3, the formation of those pathways involve 3 C's, letter C's. Number 1 is cognition. Cognition is the information you get. So it could be a pornographic tape, it could be a Quando Cespillo soap opera thing you're reading, or the novels that Beryl was talking about. So that's cognition, the material we get, or the observations we make. And then the second thing is creation. Creation is, Kasmuel is sitting next to a piano, and he's told us he's a piano teacher. So I'm sure when he's teaching a piano, he first shows to the learner who's observing, and then lets the learner, after they've learned chords or those complex things they teach us, play. Now that's called creation, using the knowledge, the cognition you have to create something. And we create 2 things. We create things or we create experiences. So cognition, then creation. And the third thing is community. Community are the people you create for or the people you create with. Now, once these 3 things are in place, those neural pathways you said are formed, maintained, and grown. And the stronger they are, the more cognition we have, the bigger our community, and the more creation we have, the bigger and stronger this particular thing comes. But again, the beauty is if it can be learned, it can be unlearned.
Okay, that is the beauty. It can be unlearned. Now, triggers. We've talked about novels. We've talked about touch. No one has talked about movies. Are movies triggers? Or music? Kasmuel.
Yeah, so triggers vary from being to being. And as Saya said, the thing about sex is it involves more than one sense. So you see, if I'm hungry, mostly I would think my nose is what would get me, like I smell food that looks delicious, or mostly smells delicious, and then helps me imagine that it tastes good. But now you see there's even the thing about clean porn, where they don't show the genitalia, they just show the faces. So it's just the faces of people who are having sex and having all that sensation. And that as well gets us to climax as if you're a consumer of porn. So the triggers could even be in music. And sometimes you know very well in your walk, you've said, I'm going to delete all the apps in my phone, which are going to cause me to sin. So apps that, and you know the apps that usually make it very, for example, I'm just talking from a perspective of a young person. Saya, an app is a thing that we usually have, like WhatsApp. Anyways.
Shots fired, man down, shots fired.
So like, there are ones that are usually subtle, and you find, like personally, I found that in my experience, Twitter, as much as Twitter is like, you know, it's the app for savage people where you go and get rebuttals and stuff like that. I found like that there were some friends of mine who would share pornographic content, and that would lead me that direction. So I said, we're going to delete Twitter. So I don't have it. I know what's going on, but I don't have it. So you might clean up and do the thing and have your corner like this clean space in my house that I have chosen for the call. But then you get into a matatu, and then you say, I'm not going to stare at that screen that's showing people who are half naked, but the music itself makes you feel some type of way. So like all that, and in movies, and sometimes it's very subtle. And the danger about movies is movies have a storyline. So they make us fall for these people who, like, we get attached to them. And you know, if you've consumed porn before, they have very trashy stories. There's no plot that can make you actually say, now this is a starring that I'm going to, like, you don't attach them to that. So when movies take it gradually and they show you that this person is struggling and whatever it is, and you get attached and they introduce pornographic material, for sure that's going to be a trigger for you. It could be in what your friends say. It could be in the kind of memes that are trending at the time. Because also the thing about the culture that we live in, and since everything is in our palm, is today people will be making memes about corona, tomorrow to be memes about pornographic content, and you have no control over that, apart from the fact that you can choose to step aside and say, I'm not going to partake of this. For me also, in my experience, there's a time I used to play at a gig that was a late gig, and since they were not paying me that much money, so it made more sense if I didn't take a cab home, because where I live is a bit safe. Again, parents, this is for conversation. I don't walk around at night. I am safe. So it made sense for me to alight at the bridge, at a bridge, and then just come over to my house. But then I was still scared of the bridge, so I decided to go to town and take the last matatus that usually come. And I usually like to dress up. If you're a dressed up man in Nairobi at 4 p.m., yeah, you might get noticed, but guys are going from Jobo, so yeah, there's many of you. Good luck if you're carrying a guitar, so a lot of guys might notice you. But if you're a smartly dressed young man walking the streets at 10:30, the story is totally different. So as much willpower as I would have, and I told myself, oh, you know, I'm a principled guy, I was only principled because I had never been exposed to that kind of temptation. So where my stage is a bit of a red light district. So it's the kind of places Paul would talk about. And so normally, the first times I had resisted, but then it got to this one time where I was like, Aki, today I'm going to fall. What made me not fall is the fact that this person tried to steal my phone, and I got annoyed, and suddenly, because there's a saying that I had heard that God gave a man a brain and a penis, but only enough blood to sustain one. So when she stole my phone, that like gave me back my blood to my brain. But then now you see the triggers could be physical. And with time, I realized even about myself, I used to be that kind of person that was like, I can never objectify women. I can never think about women in terms of their body parts. But now, once I was exposed to porn, even without struggling, I was just like, I would find myself considering things that I would never consider about women. So triggers are not as monolithic as, how cute the talk people usually give us. They're like, oh, take a jog and stuff like that. Abstain from pornographic material. If you have a phone, we see like roughly, if your on-screen time is even 2-3 hours and you're on social media, you see like 800 adverts, which have like 40% sexual content. So the triggers vary from person to person, but it's a plethora. It's gone are the days where I would say it's only in novels or movies. Nowadays, triggers are everywhere.
Okay. Now, men and the brethren, and of course, when I say men, I also mean ladies. What do we do? Or what have we done? Or what should we do now that this is a problem? We have about 8 minutes to go. So I just want us to share what we need to do so that we can avoid this. Thank you so much, Kasmuel, for your input. Thank you, Beryl, and thank you, Charlotte, because this is very important. Now, you could just begin by telling us what you have done. And when I tell you to give your parting shot, just give us your parting shot. But right now, just tell us what you have done or what you're doing to avoid or to flee for your life. Charlotte.
What I've done, I want to give it in comparison with what I'm currently doing, because I don't know, as a Christian, I die daily. I honestly believe that's my experience. So the things that I had tried before, they were not working. But for me right now, I feel like the things I've been doing, and I feel like these are different experience altogether. There's so much guilt in consuming pornography and masturbation. When you get done, you're just wondering, I mean, this is just so gross. And that back and forth of the guilt was no longer exciting. And so you try and resort to these methods, I want to put them in quotes, these methods of works that I thought could work. So I sleep on time. I don't sleep next to my phone. I switch off my phone before I sleep, so that I'm not tempted to, if I were dating at that time, I don't want to talk to my boyfriend at that time beyond a certain time, because, there's a way conversations after 11 p.m. just become tabia mbaya. Yeah. And then I still felt like either way, the urge is still there, and somehow I keep falling back. Or there's a time I just stopped watching movies, like for almost 2 years I was not watching movies, but I'm wondering how comes I'm still triggered, like even a memory, I just sit and I see someone's phone and I trigger, or I just don't want to be idle. I want to say that all those things that I try to do in and of themselves will not work, but they have to be incorporated. When you're faith must work, must go hand in hand with work. To overcome, we have to surrender our members, you see? And by surrendering, there are things that you must consciously try to do, and was consciously trying to do them. It's kushawa baridi, when you're feeling your body is way too hot, or just abstaining from watching certain kinds of movies. Those things that we are always advised to do, in and of themselves, they cannot work until I actually came and realized that the righteousness I'm trying to obtain will only come through the faith of Jesus. I don't know. It was an overwhelming kind of a difference, because when I realized that on my own, I honestly, on your own you cannot. This is war with actually the flesh, This is war. It's carnal. My mind is carnal and cannot just love the things of God. And so I gave up. I gave up trying, and I realized my constant dependence on God, because 2 days and I want to upload myself, then on the third day I just fall back. And when I made it a routine, not even a routine, like I feel my dire need that every morning when I wake up, that I want to actually talk to God first, and every night before I sleep, I make God the last thought in my mind. Slowly by slowly, like it's been a while, I can say it's been a while. when I realized my constant dependence on God, initially I was doing it for myself. But now the fact that I realized that the righteousness I am trying to obtain, I can only find it at the feet of Jesus, and making Jesus my friend and telling God, you know what, I'm struggling with this kind of sin. I'm struggling with sex. I'm struggling with masturbation. Just help me. A leopard cannot change its own spots for sure. Even our hearts, we cannot give it to him. It is just carnal and deceptive beyond all other things.
Wow.
The moment I lay down my armor, like I said, now, Audrey, you cannot do it. And I have realized that day by day, I need God. There's been a difference. There's just been a difference.
Okay. Thank you. Beryl, a minute.
Okay, yeah, sure. I don't speak much.
Yeah,
but
I know.
what has been working for me is being intentional about overcoming this thing. I wake up every day and I tell myself, Beryl, we have to do this, and I'm trusting in God. And as much as possible, I'm trying to dwell in the scripture, in the word of God. The associations I'm keeping around me should be associations which are aligning my thoughts according to what I want my thoughts to be, because that has really helped me. That is, be known that I'm still struggling. I'm not yet out of the ditch yet, but what I've been trying has worked for close to 2 weeks now, and yeah, I believe it's still gonna work. And what guides me is the verse Proverbs chapter 4 verse 23, which says that we need to guard our hearts from it, because that's where the issues of life come from. So I'm being intentional and trusting in God. Yes.
Amen. Thank you so much. Kasmuel?
Sorry.
Go on.
Okay. Personally, what Beryl and Audrey have said is what has been also working for me, and it's a thing of daily dying to self and accepting Christ. And I've also come to take refuge in the book of Psalm 121, which says, "I will lift up mine eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from?" And you realize that some of these triggers are not even in movies. Sometimes if you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend and they're just passionate about Christ, and they tell you, let's even have a devotion, that in its own can become a trigger, and it's interesting how these things work. And I think I'm also learning to know that we cannot be holy by ourselves and just surrendering to Christ. And it's even difficult because when we had this discussion as friends, and we had it once and we've had it twice where I facilitated and then Barry facilitated, what I realized is these things are like, a lot of us are struggling with it, but it's very possible to trust in God, and they're different. How women are triggered or how they're attracted, and how we men are, it's different, but all in all, we can trust Christ. And there's a quote that I really love that says, "If one who daily commutes with God errs from the path, and if he turns a moment from looking steadfastly unto Jesus, it's not because he sins willfully. For when he sees his mistake, he turns again and fastens his eyes upon Jesus, and the fact that he has erred does not make him less dear to the heart of God." So whenever we relapse,
Amen.
the problem about relapsing is when we have recurrent problems and we think about, since we have very wrong ideas of salvation, we relapse so much and then we end up giving up. But this is what I want to tell any youth who's struggling or anyone who's battling, young or old. We have a savior who is your righteousness. Imagine this is not your problem. You're fighting the wrong battle. This is God's problem. So I wake up and I tell Jesus, "You are the one who gave me this body, and you have spared me of death." You know the way he used to deal with people in Sodom and Gomorrah. At those days, Nini, even the people who decided to help the ark, he smote them. And you've spared me. And now I am feeling this urge. This is your problem. I promise I cannot do it on my own. If you trust Christ with it, trust me. It's going to be way better and way easier than you ever would have thought.
Thank you, Kasmuel. Now, Saya, over to you. Just give us your last words and your parting shots in 30 seconds or so.
The last words is, this conversation has just begun. I think it needs more time.
Yeah.
We need to zoom in some more to it. There's a lot more to dig in. Two sides of the coin. I empathize with guys who struggle. I've never had to struggle with these things. So just saying that in really to telling guys like victory is possible, to live a life outside of that is perfectly possible. But also on the converse side, my years of speaking and coaching, I've worked with people I cannot number who've walked through the valley of porn and masturbation and been able to emerge victorious. So even those who've gone through, I want to reassure you, victory is possible. But how? Please remember that triangle. And Dave, guys may think this is Illuminati. This is this is cognition, this is creation, this is community. This is how you learn anything, good or bad. So in your path to victory, cognition, and everything Charlotte, Beryl, and Kasmuel have been able to mention is very big on cognition. How we think about God is going to determine how we will enter this battle. So there are two ways of overcoming. Either the traditional way is to tell you, stop watching porn. That's good, but the problem is when I tell you for a whole week, stop thinking about porn, you end up thinking about it. So not only stop thinking about it, but replace it with new things to think about. So for those who, it's novels, or it is Cuando se spilo, or it is the porn your buddies have given you, you need to replace that. And then creation is, it's not enough to tell you just not to masturbate, because that's an experience you're creating. You need to begin creating alternative experiences. So I like the way Kasmuel, I think he's dropped out. I like the way Kasmuel has thrown himself into the and so begin creating, learn new things, create new experiences, and change your community. Okay, so the people and the communities we have are both virtual as well as face-to-face as we do this. And we are doing this not by power, not by might, but by God's might. And I think Paul's words are creative. Whatever things are true, whatever things are honest, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, if there be any praise in this, think about this. And Dave, for risk of overshooting my 30 seconds is this. One word Paul uses for people in this struggle is crucify the flesh. Crucifixion was not instant death, but it was assured death. Any person put on a cross, it was not a question of if, it was a question of when they will die. So for any person going through these struggles, you need to remember you learned your way in, so you will need to unlearn your way out. And that's a process of crucifixion. And the body does not die without giving a fight. But as long as it is crucified, as long as you've changed the cognition, as long as you've changed your creation, as long as you've changed your community, there will be a fight. But as long as you crucify the flesh daily, it will die. And the quote I wouldn't like to miss out is from Ellen White. If there's a victory to be won, there's a battle to be fought. And we will soon realize the flesh fights against the spirit, and the spirit fights against the flesh. Who wins depends on who we feed. That's it.
Who wins depends on who we feed. Thank you so much, guys. And viewer, I think you have been enriched just the same way I have been. The Bible says in Matthew 11:28, come unto me, those who are heavily laden, and I will give you rest. And as I said it, crucifixion is not an instant death, but it is a sure one. So fight and fight and fight. It is amazing that maybe I could just leave you with this prayer, because I see time is not on our side. By myself, I cannot make it, but I know with God's hands clasped in mine, I know that we will make it. May God bless you even as we ponder about these words, and let's meet again for another Zoom-in session. As Saya said it, this has just begun. See you soon for our next episode. Thank you.